Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. The Wizard of Oz and Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages are two books up for discussion today that are not quite so far apart as one might imagine. And here to explain why they made it into his personal 10 best list of books that had the greatest influence on his spiritual journey is Jungian psychotherapist, alchemical coach, and, I have it on good authority, wily modern-day trickster, Thom Cavalli, PhD. A dream analyst, artist, and spiritualist, as well as a speaker, Thom Cavalli is the author of two major books, Alchemical Psychology, Old Recipes for Living in a New World, and Embodying Osiris, The Secrets of Alchemical Transformation, as well as many articles published in Psychological Perspectives and the Alchemical Journal. A yearly contributor of book reviews and film criticism for the Jung Journal, he gives a wide range of workshops and seminars at Jungian institutes, mystery schools, and conferences. Thom Cavalli, welcome. We'll get to that wily trickster a little bit later.
I'm surprised how you picked up on that. I didn't even know.
Of course.
Into my psyche.
So you start your introduction to our 10 best spiritual book list on the website by saying that choosing just 10 spiritual books is a cruel exercise. Why so?
Well, I came up with about 50.
Only 50.
It was like giving up one of your children, you know. Well, it was an interesting exercise, and I was trying to figure out what would be the cutting criteria. You know, why these books and not the Tao Te Ching or the Bible, you know, the classics. And what I ended up with is memory. You know, I've been very, very fortunate in my life to have met, actually, and even worked with some of these authors. And I have some personal, you know, connection with them. And so, you know, reading a book oftentimes is a process of remembering. You know, oftentimes you'll read something, oh my goodness, that confirms what I was thinking about just yesterday. And in a similar way, some of these books, which are really portals, they're very congruent with one of the basic tenets of Jungian psychology, and that's to expand the field of consciousness. And that's what these books in particular have done for me.
Okay, so I shouldn't be apologizing to you. You should be thanking me.
Okay.
Giving you that exercise there.
Oh, I'm very, very appreciative. Yes, I am. Because some of these books, you know, I read as a kid and, you know, throughout my life. So it was kind of like going back and reliving those wonderful times.
So not so cruel after all.
Not at all.
You'd be surprised how many guests come on this show and tell us that we have been responsible, you know, for telling them to get rid of so many of their children. So tell me what books mean to you in general. You know, what's your relationship with books?
They shaped my life. You know, I think that we all have a fate that's given to us. But the question is, our destiny is what we do with it. And that's not, you know, it takes a village, as they say. And I think it takes a library, you know, to kind of go this way or that way. And it's not just the books. We have to, you know, really understand that, you know, as a writer myself, the experience that's being shared with us, so I'm just as interested in the author, as what they are, trying to communicate. And they have shaped my life, I mean, in very, very distinctive, dramatic ways.
Mm. Well, your first book on the list is by a man who changed your life and literally changed your life and opened the door to a golden world, you said. And the
Yes.
book is Balancing Heaven and Earth, a memoir of visions, dreams, and realizations by Robert A. Johnson.
Yes. We could spend this whole time just on this book. And I chose this book among many, and I will tell your viewers, you literally can pick up any Robert Johnson book, and they're all gems. They're all insightful. They're all beautifully written, easy reads. But I chose this one in particular because it is a kind of a little backstory behind this. But let me preface it by saying that my personal memory, a living memory of Robert, he was my first analyst. And we spent about a couple of years in doing therapy analysis. And this book, though, is really interesting because he had a very, very short dream towards in his older age. Very simple dream. He was at his writing desk. His pen ran out of ink. He interpreted that as, that's the end of my writing career.
Oh, wow.
That's how in tune he was with his dream life, his unconscious.
Wow.
So he put down his pen, as it were, until a colleague, friend, the younger man, came to him, an analyst, and visited. And he said, Robert, you've written about so many myths and about so many important people, etc. But the one myth you haven't told is your own. Robert paused. Now, I've been to his home, so I can kind of, embody that experience. I know he got up from where he was sitting across from this young man, went into his study, and he comes back with, we're dating ourselves here, but a little tape recorder, sat down, he says, let's start. Just like that.
Just like that.
Just like that. And it's a kind of an expose of sorts, because Robert was the absolute most profoundly introverted monastic person I have ever met. He had incredible extroverted abilities. Nobody could tell the story the way Robert did. But what he never did share, and pursuant to this friend's suggestion, he really gives you insight into his life, which, given your initial appearance, Robert, you could never have imagined this guy traveling in India 20, 30 times and the wild, wild situations he found himself in. And that's another point, because I had a love affair with India back then. And so we shared this passion for that beautiful country.
I was doing a little bit of research on him. He had an NDE and he lost the lower part of his right leg. And
Yes.
I mean, he had a mystical vision that
Yes.
transported him to a realm beyond consciousness.
Yes. Yeah. And that's very instructive, because even now, it's sort of like a trend. In psychology, we go through trends, and the latest trend is research into trauma. And, the typical way that we think about trauma as, anxiety producing, PTSD, that kind of thing. But in that example that you just cited, Robert lost his leg in an automobile accident. I think he was very, very young, like 12 years old or something like that. But what they're finding in trauma research, and what certainly is exemplified by Robert, his experience of that, it flipped him around, meaning that it turned him towards the unconscious and opened up a profound vision of the unconscious world, which he later called the golden world. And I shared with that experience with him at times.
Is he still alive?
No, he died, I think, 2 years ago. Yeah. We actually, as it turns out, when I went to graduate school, I lived in San Diego, and it was just by chance that our paths crossed, and I ended up in therapy with him. And at one point, I literally lived next door, on the next block from St. Paul's Episcopal Church. I just walk across the street. And there's a synchronicity to that, you know, as it turns out, and I'm talking about 5-6 decades later, after I kind of lost touch with Robert, although from time to time he would send me these beautiful emails. I found out that he was giving a talk nearby at another church called St. Paul's, which I literally can walk 2 blocks that way. So he ended up chasing after me.
Yes, yeah. Well, book number 2, Only One Sky, on the Tantric Way of Tilopa's Song of Mahamudra by
Yeah.
Rajneesh, otherwise known as Osho.
Yes, yes. Well, going back to what I said about, you know, the transformative aspect of not just reading these books, but in some way engaging with them. I was in graduate school at the time, and I have always had a passion for books. I've always haunted used bookstores. And on one of these occasions, when I was living in San Diego, I just walked into a bookstore I hadn't been in before. And the proprietor and I kind of struck up a conversation. And he said, just out of the blue, he said, "This book is for you." And it was Only One Sky.
Mm.
I had been studying Eastern spirituality for a time before then, but not experiencing it, not living it. And long story short, I became a sannyasin, a devotee of, he was called Rajneesh, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh in those days. And when I say he changed my life, I mean, I was full bore. I mean, underneath my graduate robes, I was all in orange with long hair, you know. I mean, I really committed as much as I could. The way the Eastern path works is that you're given a spiritual name. And so my spiritual name, which I don't typically go public with this, but in this instance, that's fine. It's called Anand Vichara. And Anand Vichara means blissful thoughts. And that's not just a name tag, that's a path. And that became my path. The use of words and communicating, whether it's as we are doing verbally or in writing or teaching or therapy or writing. I mean, all of these have shaped my path. A strange thing happened in, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago, when I don't know if you are familiar with, there's a documentary called Wild Wild West, a brilliant series. And it was really an expose on the ashram that
Oh,
Rajneesh
yes, yes.
in Oregon, which curled my hair. I mean, I just could not believe, you know, that people were being poisoned and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what that did in the larger context of my relationship with him is to remind me that there's something called a guru projection, but that every guru is a man or a woman and they have a shadow. And so I wrote a piece, actually, a very critical piece on that series. The subtitle is a biased review of this series, which I certainly was.
Book number 3, and you probably won't be surprised to hear that this one comes up time and time again. It is, of course, Memories, Dreams, Reflections by
Yes.
the master, C.G. Jung.
Unsurprising. I mean,
Yeah.
these are his works up here, his collected works. But when people come to me in one fashion or another, they'll ask, you know, where do I start? You don't start with the collected works. I will say that it's tough because he's a phenomenologist and he circumambulates around subjects, and he's tremendously scholarly. But as I said at the beginning, you know, to me, I'm as interested in the person, the author, as I am in what they're writing. And this book is profound. I mean, it's profound. It's profound in the insight that you get into how he developed a relationship with his unconscious. It's a beautiful book. As a kind of a side note, I was surprised to learn this in my own research about this book. That, in fact, when he wrote this, he was very elderly at this point. I think it was like 4 years before he actually passed on. Only the first four chapters are actually written by him, and the remainder of the chapters were dictated to Amelia Jaffe, who was an analyst. But it's seamless, though. You wouldn't know that unless I told you. Let me just say one last thing. If we had a biography, an autobiography written by Jesus or Buddha, wouldn't that be a treasure? And that's how I see this book. It's written by, a real brilliant, insightful man, wise man.
Yeah. Yeah. Book number 4 is The Emerald Tablet, Alchemy for Personal Transformation by Dennis Hauck.
Right.
And that was published in 1999, I believe.
1 year before my book came out. Dennis is a friend of mine, and I say it that way because Dennis is always one step ahead of me. Which has its advantages, because when I read this book, actually I picked it up at the Los Angeles book fair at UCLA. And I picked up this book and I shut it. I said, "Oh my God, this man wrote my book." And that says something about us and our relationship. Dennis and I are dedicated to decoding and making this incredible art that's so misunderstood available in a way that's easily digestible. And that's what Dennis does. I mean, the breadth of his knowledge is just incredible, but his writing ability is also wonderful too. Very, very accessible. He goes through the 7 operations. And as if that weren't enough, he gives history that history to me is the tracing of the development of human consciousness. But, all of those things, can be very distant from us until, as a good writer does, like Dennis, is able to put it in a familiar form, basically tell a story. Yeah. And the stories that he tells are just marvelous. Dennis is an amazing person. He's done more in a modern, as a modern writer and teacher than anyone I know for advancing and making accessible this incredible art.
Yeah.
He's another introvert. Oh my God, he's as introverted as Robert was. You could probably tell I'm the opposite. I'm very extroverted.
So you said in your, I think you said it in your original description that we published on the website, that he's curating an expansion of the Alchemy exhibition at the Rosicrucian headquarters.
Yes, that's been going on for years. I just learned, actually, through a patient of mine who lives there. I kind of get updates because she loves that place. That has been going on now for a few years. They've opened the wing that's just dedicated to it's an alchemy museum essentially, but they've got grand plans to expand it, and Dennis is leading that. They're having funding issues, so it's kind of taking longer than we would hope. But he has promised me that when it does officially open, I'm going to give the first talk there. So I'm very excited by that opportunity.
So what sort of things would one expect to find at an alchemy exhibition?
Oh, I've been to the one that's now open. It's been some years, but as I recall, they beautifully illustrate the manuscripts. They have each section devoted to a particular operation, explaining in plain English, what it is and how we could use it. It's really beautifully done. And it's well placed, given that it's within the Rosicrucian. That's the Rosicrucian headquarters in San Jose.
Mm-hmm. So number 5, The Trickster, a study in American mythology by Paul Radin.
Yes. Again, another personal memory. I was gifted this book for a good reason. People ask me how I started my interest in alchemy or alchemical psychology. I'm not a physical alchemist, I'm a psychologist. And that's important because when this book was given to me, I was in graduate school studying for my doctorate in clinical psychology. And I was treating, as part of my internship, substance abusers. And I noticed this really interesting dynamic that was going on. Basically, we were each trying to manipulate each other for various reasons, but at different levels of consciousness. And I became very, very interested in that in-between state. And that kind of led me to discover not just Jung, but this his 30 years research into alchemy. But the principal connection here, as to your question, has to do with the patron of alchemy, and the patron who kind of looks over this dynamic between people is called Mercurius, or in Latin, the Latin god Mercury. And so my dissertation was focused on the phenomenology of the trickster archetype, of which Mercurius is one personification. Now, very, very briefly, this book is hilarious. I mean, it is it's a story, these little narratives of this character named Kunu. This is from the Winnebago trickster cycle. And what it does in about, I don't know, maybe 60 pages, if I remember, it traces the development of human consciousness from our animal origins, which is what Kunu begins, and ends up as an anti-hero who is has a sacred place and function for the community. It's hilarious. It's the kind of situations he gets into. It's fun reading.
You said that this is how you met the trickster and began exploring how this wily spirit can be your best ally or your worst enemy.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, the relationship that we have with this particular archetype. An archetype is basically a pattern.
Mm.
And we're going to live life unconsciously at the mercy of our fate, or we're going to be able to define through an individuation process who we are. But that's a literally tricky business, you know, how we fool ourselves and how we are fooled. And by developing a conscious relationship and a deliberate, you know, venerating all the personifications, not just Kunu in this particular myth cycle, but there are endless variations. And it's sad that in the West, we have one day, I don't know about in England, but here we have one day, April Fool's Day, which is more of a commercial, secular holiday than anything to do with what it really represents. That's different in different parts of the world. But again, if you have a more conscious relationship with the trickster, then you could avail himself of the gifts, you know, that he brings to us. He could penetrate into the unconscious, the underworld, and come back unscathed, which is, you know, for some people, particularly if they're doing microdosing and they're not ready for something like that, they don't make it out alive.
Yeah. Well, book number 6, Women Who Run with the Wolves, Myths and Stories of the Wild Woman by Clarissa Pinkola Estes.
What a wonderful book. What a wonderful book. I don't know if you've read it, but this is one of those books I call required reading. I was so amazed with this book and what it bespeaks, but also the way it's delivered. You know, the author, is what's called a cantadora. So she sings the myths. And this book, I think it has some political import as well, because it came, you know, during the time, maybe the height of the feminist movement, which had to happen. But I have some questions about how it got expressed. I think it latched on too much in a conscious way to masculine attributes. And what this book does is it adds balance. What it does, it really teaches women, first of all, that they have a history, a mythological history. But also, it's very, very, very empowering. I was so turned on by this book, I literally would buy or get from thrift shops copies of it. And I literally would hand them out to not just my women patients, but my men patients as well, because it's that enlightening. She really casts light on the instinctual, animalistic roots of nature, the wild woman, the Kali in us. I just love it. And the stories are just so instructive that I use, as with Robert's work as well. They have molded me as a therapist. They've taught me about the dark feminine and what that can mean to us and how we can use that in our lives. Beautiful book.
I haven't read that book. I was too busy reading Iron John, believe it or not, around that time.
That's sort of like a companion book.
Yes.
I use that story, God knows, countless times with men, particularly, to put them in touch with their inner strength that has been lost, their instinctual origins. And it's recovering this rusted old giant. And the amazing story that unfolds in that book is a beautiful book. It's really a lovely companion to Women Who Run with the Wolves.
Yeah. So I'll have to read.
Yes,
well.
please do. Please do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to take a short break now.
Okay.
You're listening to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's 10 Best Spiritual Books weekly interview series and sharing the top 10 spiritual books that influenced his life journey is Jungian psychotherapist, alchemical coach, dream analyst, and author Thom Cavalli, PhD, who will be sharing more of his favourite books after this short break, so stay tuned.
Om Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Om Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com, click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
I wanted to talk to you about a program called the Dream Arc and a retreat that we're doing, and I want to invite you along. And the Dream Arc is a dream technology. And even the latest physics is suggesting now that reality is not what we think it is, that it's kind of a construct. And that the Dream Arc teaches us how to use the full operating system to navigate our brain frequencies between waking and sleeping and dreaming, and to move through the inner realms and the outer realms seamlessly. And you will work in the Dream Arc with certain animals that will come to you, maybe in real life, maybe through your intuition, in magical ways, or perhaps through, just dreams that come to you. It's filled, the Dream Arc, with invitations and suggestions and tasks that you choose intuitively. You choose the ones for you. You don't know what you're choosing, but they come to you. So please join us as we dive down the wormhole into the Dream Arc, and let's see what happens.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Thom Cavalli, book number 7. Classic books, classic movie, The Wizard of Oz, Frank Boehm and William Wallace Denslow.
Yeah.
Why is this on your list?
It should be on everybody's list. You know, I, along with probably millions of other people around the world, have been brought up on The Wizard of Oz. But, you know, over the years, as you mature and you get older, you begin to realize this is more than, you know, just a fairy tale, that it has incredibly deep roots in mythology. If there's any one book that really exemplifies one of the most essential part of the individuation process of becoming a person, this book so beautifully portrays it. I mean, we all know basically it's a story about a young girl caught up in a tornado, and all these 4 characters come out, and you know. But what we learn, and talk about the trickster, by the way, we're back to trickster. Who is that man behind the green curtain? Classic image of the trickster, you know, because we think, he's been caught. But what does he say to her? You know, all these, you know, the lion and the tin man, you know, all they are personifications of her. And so one of the chief recipes from alchemical psychology is, in Latin, is solve et coagula. It's the breaking apart and the rejoining. And so her psyche, this is a classic movie of the individuation process, where this young girl is blown apart, in a sense, is dismembered, and then put back together, and then she can come home. But when she comes home, though, she comes home as a woman.
Yeah.
Oh, such a beautiful.
You know, I first saw that movie when I was about 5 or 6, and it gave me nightmares for years. That yellow brick road and that witch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly didn't get, you know,
Well, I would imagine you have a different opinion now.
Now, indeed, yeah, but at the time, I'll never forget, people only used to have to mention the yellow brick road, and
There's a good reason to be afraid of the witch, the wicked witch of the West, because in symbolism, she is the undeveloped femininity.
Yeah.
You know, who develops, you know, I mean, there's the beautiful play of opposite with Glenda, classic Jungian. Should have been written by a Jungian.
So number 8, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, Manly P. Hall. And this one comes up again and again as well.
As well it should. Again, going back to, as I said at the beginning, you know, I have a personal connection with some of these books, including this one. I didn't know Manly P. Hall, but I live in Orange County and work in Orange County, which is about 30 miles south of Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, there is something called the Philosophical Research Society, which is a complex of buildings that he established. And I had the very, very good fortune of speaking from the same lectern as this giant of a man, who he was, for sure. What fascinates me about this book is that, you know, my position in terms of religion, you know, is I try to take the best of all of them, because they all have pearls of wisdom to offer. And what this book does is it gives us, it shines light on more the occult or spiritual systems, all of which, again, you know, I try to draw from their pearls of wisdom. So, you know, there's evolution, which is the physical development of consciousness, but there's also something called involution, which is my interest, is how we, in our unconscious ways, you know, develop consciousness. And there are systems, you know, I mean, the full title of this book tells you what it's about. I'm going to read it real fast. The Secret Teachings of All Ages, an encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy being an interpretation of the secret teachings concealed within the rituals, allegories, and mysteries of all ages. It's a mouthful. And, you know, he wrote this, I think, when he was, I don't know, 27 years old. It's just his opus magnum. Now, he's written some 50,000 essays, and it's given 7,000 lectures. And again, as with Rajneesh, I want to emphasize that it's not just what these people say, but it's also how they say it. With Rajneesh, it's really breath. Every sentence rides on a breath. Manly Hall is a classic lecturer with tremendous authority and grasp of his subject. So it's not just a matter of reading his books, but also listening if you can get hold of some of his tapes and his lectures. And they're just wonderful, life-changing.
So they're still available, the tapes, are they?
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Probably you can get them on YouTube is my guess.
Yeah, you said that he is alleged to have been one of those who provided Jung with alchemical books.
You know, I haven't been able to actually substantiate that, but at least that's the hearsay, you know, that when Jung got interested in alchemy, and it wasn't popular at the time, he started putting the word out to people, you know, bookshop sellers, antiquarians, etc., to give him some books on alchemy. And it's alleged that Manly P. Hall was one of those people.
Interesting. So, book number 9, you're going to have to help me out here, because as a Brit, you know, we tend to pronounce words somewhat differently than Americans do.
That's
So,
okay. We'll forgive you for that.
The Golden Ass of
Apuleius.
Apuleius.
Yes, yes, yeah.
The Liberation of the Feminine in Man.
Yes, yeah.
By Marie-Louise von France.
Okay, let me just start off by saying, as I know I keep saying this, but this is my bent, you could literally pick up any book written by Marie-Louise von France, and you will be very happy you did. I don't know anyone, other than maybe Jung himself, who has more intimate understanding of how the psyche works than her. The breadth of her writing is just phenomenal. I could have picked any one of her books. I picked this one because it's a masterpiece to begin with, an absolute masterpiece. I picked it because it fascinates me. It's basically the story of a Roman. It's a novel, so it's very readable. It's a story about this man named Lucius. And Lucius is playing with magic, particularly with sex magic and what have you, and things backfire and he's turned into an ass, which is a real interesting comment on where magic can go wrong. I draw a very clear distinction between magic and alchemy. Very, very simple. Magic is very willful. It's the willful control of nature. And I guess I don't trust human nature well enough to have confidence that power could be used properly, as illustrated in this book. By contrast, alchemy is the facilitation of natural processes. Eventually, Lucius is transformed back into his human form by Isis, who is near and dear to my heart because I wrote a book on Osiris, and of course, Isis was his sister wife, as it were. Just an amazing character. But in the course of telling the story, there's the myth of Psyche and Amor, which is a beautiful, beautiful myth, which parenthetically Robert also wrote about in one of his books called She. And it tells this beautiful story about this young girl, human girl, who falls in love with a god, but is prohibited from seeing him. And her sisters put this suspicion in her ear, and she goes at night with a candle, and the candle drips. He wakes up only to find, Psyche finds that he's Cupid, or Amor, this beautiful boy god, and he flies off. But it does have a happy ending. I'm not going to tell you the ending, otherwise you won't read the book.
Okay, what do we know about Marie-Louise?
Mary Louise von Franz met like on a school expedition when she was a young girl. I think she was like 17, 18, something like that, years old. And by that time, I think Jung must have been 50, so he's much older than her. And she absolutely was enamored by him and wanted to work with him, get analysis from him. Of course, she didn't have the money. And so he struck a bargain with her. She was a student of, she was a linguist and a classicist. So for some of these very old cryptic manuscripts, he relied on her to do the translation in return for his analytic treatment of her. Just an absolutely brilliant, brilliant woman. And the breadth of her work extends from fairy tales to alchemy, all the way into physics. Psyche and Matter is one of her classics, which is something that at the end of his life, Jung handed von Franz a little note because he didn't have the vigor, to pursue the subject. And it has to do what we now call quantum physics. And then she took that and she completed, that work. And she had done that for his wife, Emma Jung, as well, because her study was on the Grail legend, and she died before she was able to finish it. In comes von Franz, and she finishes the work.
Wow. Did you ever meet her?
Oh, don't ask that. Don't ask. I was living, I could have, but the timing wasn't right. I just wasn't mature enough to recognize her genius, because she did come from time to time to Los Angeles and give lectures. Missed that boat, unfortunately. But I did have a personal relationship with a man who was analyzed by her, who read my second book on Osiris and wrote a wonderful review. And he told me the story because they had a very contentious relationship. But just before she was dying, he went to visit her, and he made his way to her very recluse little house. And for 15 minutes, it was only supposed to be 15 minutes, talked with her, and she drew him near and kissed him on the cheek. To which I said, "Which cheek?"
Which cheek, and let me touch it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so book number 10 is Revisioning Psychology by James Hillman, nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, published in 1975.
Yeah. Again, personal memory. At the time when I discovered this book, it was introduced through my graduate education. And my chairperson of my dissertation, Dr. Christine Downing, was friends with James Hillman. James Hillman at the time was touted as the next new Jung. He was the big thing. I had just gotten my doctorate. I think the ink hadn't dried yet when I was invited to a dinner party by Christine, and who was there, much to my surprise, was James Hillman. And he had a tagline, and essentially that really reverberates throughout this book. And that is, "What does soul want?" And sure enough, in the few minutes that I had when I was introduced to him and we struck up a little bit of a conversation, what does soul want? I mean, I was so, thrown off by that. I was quite flat-footed, just to be in the presence of this giant. And I stumbled, and God knows what I said or didn't say. And it took years for me to kind of come to terms with that, because my dissertation, being on the trickster, has more to do with the spirit. And we draw a distinction between spirit and soul. So the question for me is not what does soul want, is how does spirit move? And I never really was able to bring that back to him. I did meet him in some fundraising occasions later on, but never brought that back up. But this book really revisioned, literally, Jungian psychology, where there kind of is a centralization by Jung, basically in a kind of a Christian sort of way, focused principally in therapy and on the archetype of the self. James Hillman blew the doors open right off of the consulting room, and it said, soul is not just in therapy, soul is everywhere. And how do we then apply our Jungian thoughts to healing the world? he is a trickster because he's a masterful writer, loves to play with words, and he's been criticized by some for that, but he has tremendous depth. Amazing man. He also, I was raised and brought up in New York City, and he was across the river there in New Jersey, and there's always some kind of weird rivalry between New Yorkers who kind of snoutily look down at people in New Jersey. So I had that kind of tension with him right from the beginning. Not to mention that we both are as arrogant, or at least were as arrogant, fresh out of the city as, you know, as people coming from that area are. Fortunately, I moved to the West. I've been here 30, 40 years, whatever, and that's sort of burned off. Unfortunately, James Hillman, I'm not sure I would say the same thing, although he's deceased now.
Mm. Well, that's your 10 best list. I want to talk about you. Before we do, I usually ask people who of the authors would they most like to meet. You've met several of them, and
Yeah.
I would guess that if you were given the choice, you would pick either Jung or Marie-Louise. Now, I can be the willful bender of nature. I can play magic, and I can give you the experience of meeting one of those. Of course, you're going to have to meet them in your imagination. But which one would you like me to tap my magic wand for?
Oh, yeah, it's another cruel exercise. Oh my God. I'd have to say von Franz. I'd have to say von Franz, and I'll tell you why. Because I think I could talk with her. I don't think I could talk with you.
Yeah.
She's much more personal and, you know, accessible.
Okay, well, you know, you have my permission. You have everything you need. You can use your imagination, and then you can let us know how that conversation went.
I will.
So, when people ask you how you got interested in alchemy, apparently you laughingly say drugs.
Right.
Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
I say that just kiddingly, you know. Going back to what I said at the top of the hour, you know, at the time I was both working and interning as a substance abuse counselor at that time, and it was through this thing called intersubjectivity. It's the space between us that fascinated me, and that led me to study Mercurius and alchemical psychology. But, you know, as I kind of thought about that later, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but as I was a kid, you know, I had a very tough upbringing. I was brought up in East New York, and the government projects with gangs. It was pretty crazy. And there's not much good that I can say about my father, but there are a couple of pearls. And this memory came to me. Do you know what a rubber egg is?
No.
Try this. Take an egg and get a glass, fill it up with vinegar, and put the egg in and just leave it overnight and see what happens.
Okay.
In the morning, when you take the egg out, it's elastic. You could literally, it's like silly putty. If you remember silly putty, it's kind of like that. And I never really connected it until, you know, this question has been asked many times, but I was so fascinated with that transmutation, you know, of this egg, you know, and it kind of stuck in my mind. So I'm now saying, no, it had to do with a rubber egg, not drugs.
Okay. Okay, we'll correct that in your bio. Another story about you. Someone wrote that your workshops are a delightful mix of scholarship and performance art, including symbolic ritual mummification and culinary offerings from recipes created by victims of the Holocaust that demonstrate obscure alchemical principles, operations, and procedures.
Wow.
One can never be sure what to expect from this wily modern-day trickster, but rest assured that a higher order always emerges from his special brand of alchemy.
Wow.
Are you not familiar with that?
I'm not. I mean, I'd love for you just later, maybe just to text me the name of that person. I would love to read it.
I can't remember. I'll have to see if I can find it
Okay.
in my notes. But
Oh,
I thought, wow, mummification, and
yeah.
culinary offerings. What kind of workshops are these?
All right. Let me be short with this. So in undergraduate school, I was majoring in fine arts. I was in painting and drawing and sculpture, what have you. But at the time in New York City, there was this new vogue called conceptual art. And right next door on Queens College, the City University of New York, was the humanities building. And I started taking psychology classes. Ultimately ended up majoring in both. And my art then changed from the plastic arts of painting, watercolor, drawing, or what have you, to writing, but also something called performance art. I don't call my lectures and the seminars that I give performance art, but basically that's what I do. So, for example, a couple of months ago, I for the fourth time, I've done a mystery school, a 4-day intensive. And my idea is that it's not, I don't want to just lecture people, how do I draw you in? How do I create a living experience? So when I go through ancient Egyptian alchemy, I just don't talk about the mummification process. We literally wrap people up and they stay wrapped up like mummies for about an hour. And it's phenomenal experience. I've done it many, many times in different venues. So that's just the flavor. In terms of the culinary piece of that, boy, whoever this is knows me going way, way back, because 23 years ago, when I started giving talks based on the Alchemical Psychology book, I wanted people to have a living experience of the recipes, because we typically think of them as food recipes, which these are not. These are like our algorithms or formula. And so I found a book, and I won't go too much into this, but this person had been in the concentration camps. And in the book, they actually had recipes but they were imaginative recipes, some of it memory, and some of it was to give them hope. Well, I got hold of some of those recipes and literally cooked up the dish and served it to the people in the group.
And
it was phenomenal because, again, it's not just talking about something, it's experiencing it.
so you've got an event coming up in
Yes,
October.
yes, yes, yeah.
What kind of experience are you going to give
Yeah,
the
yeah.
attendees?
That's tough, doing it online. But let me preface this by saying last year, there's a friend of ours, Gary Bobrick, who has this referral service for people who are looking for Jungian therapy or coaching. It's called Jungian Online, one word, .com, Jungian Online. And I did a series of 6 seminars, 2 hours each, of an introduction to alchemical psychology. Again, trying to bring it into the popular realm so that it's usable. Having the art, piece, I go to great lengths to create these beautiful images so that the images, Jung says that all thought begins in image. And as an artist, I see that it's not just what's on the image in terms of the writing, but it's also the image itself that conveys the message. So on October 8th, this is sort of like a companion to what I did last year. It's aimed a little bit more at application, and it's called Jungian Alchemical Healing. So if anyone is interested, they can go on to jungianonline.com, go to the courses, pops up, and it'll give you a whole menu of some of the interesting things you're doing, including my class.
So we only have about a minute and a half left, but are you planning any more books?
I never stop writing. Never stop.
Never stop writing.
And I started writing a book last year. I gave up. I was trying to literally give voice to the unutterable, and it defeated me. And then so I went all the way to the opposite extreme. And now I'm writing a book on the application of alchemical principles, which is something that I tend to do more in alchemical coaching, but I also draw upon some of these principles when it's appropriate with my patients.
Well, that sounds interesting. I'd love to know more, but unfortunately, we are almost out of time. I really want to thank you for adding your 10 best list of spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. Thank you, Thom.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been really delightful.
Good. Embodying Osiris, The Secrets of Alchemical Transformation, published by Quest Books, Red Wheel Weiser, and Alchemical Psychology, Old Recipes for Living in a New World. 2 books by Thom Cavalli. For more information about Thom, his work and his books, visit alchemicalworks.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back again at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again to Thom Cavalli.
Namaste.
Likewise.